Welcome to Leadership Kung Fu with your hosts, Sandi and Jennifer Long.
So welcome to another episode of Leadership Kung Fu. It's a podcast that focuses on practice of leadership and how, just like with the art of Kung Fu, leadership is a practice and a discipline, and it takes time to learn and perfect. And I'm here with my co-host, Jen Long from Own Up in Denver, Colorado. Hey, Jen.
Hey, Sandi. Nice to see you.
You too. And I'm Sandi from Satori Consulting in Toronto. Today, we wanted to talk about leadership during stress and uncertainty. And we're looking at it thinking, like, what can leaders do differently? How can leaders do things better? So I've been thinking about this topic recently. The cost of living topic has come up a lot during coaching sessions, which is an interesting sort of phenomena to get that personal aspect in the coaching that's sort of outside of, how do I do my job better? So it's this overarching level of stress that our employees are feeling right now. So I wanted to frame it up a little bit about how we can look at this from a leadership perspective. But I was looking at from the costs of things that are happening right now, and average merit increases in 2026, both Canada and US, were about 3.5%. The CPI, the Consumer Price Index, is in the US about 3.8% in April, in Canada 2.8%, which on surface feels like it's a wash, right? But gas prices, both in US and Canada, are up 28%. Groceries and tomatoes and things like that are up astronomically, and people are stressed. So what do we do as leaders to help navigate this really stressful, uncertain time?
Right. Uncertainty is the big U, and people, the employee, right, is really wearing all of the decision making in ways that isn't necessarily productive, well thought out. Strategic, right? Meaning the leaders always make the decisions and the employees always wear them. That's just how it works. But
Yeah.
because we've got speed in the mix and people are pushing at a rate, it feels unprecedented. Like, it feels to me there's a false sense of speed. And I don't know, that's just another whole notion, because we're not aware of, when we're in uncertainty, how the pressure of time, capacity play in, that we're just kind of subconsciously aware of.
Yeah. And I think to add to that, so you've got this pressure of time, you have pressure of things coming at us like AI that are adding complexity to how people are feeling about their jobs, the nervousness about their jobs. So you've got time, you've got, economic, you've got tariffs that are affecting us, you've got all of these AI pieces coming at us. And if everybody's feeling this whole heightened sense of, I've got to do more with less. I've got to,
Yeah.
right?
Which is, we've talked about this before, podcasts, right? Do more with less is just not true. You can only do less with less.
Yes.
And when you're looking at employees who are up against it financially, economically, personally, in addition to up against it going, are my skills even going to be relevant?
Right.
That we're creating a situation of distrust. The gap is just really getting so much bigger between what's going on at the employee level and what's happening in the leadership meetings, right? And so you've had some conversations lately that have sort of really surfaced this for you, is what it sounds like. Yeah.
Yeah, it really has. And then people are there, the stress. And I think, so the conversations around all of these certain things are happening. So in my day-to-day daily life at home, and it's now creeping into the workforce. And part of the conversations around is like, what are employees doing to help not alleviate the stress, because the stress is there and employers can't just change that. But what are they doing to ensure that their employees are skilled up, right? So when things turn around, and they will, that we have the right skills. What are they doing to create space for organizations to have those conversations, for people to have those conversations. In the beginning, we were sort of talking about in COVID, right? Everybody talked about the mental health of everybody. And there was all these really active conversations about it. And I don't hear it happening as much now. Yet the mental health, I would suggest, is as heightened as it was back in 2019, 2020.
Yeah. Yeah, but it feels like it's taken a real back seat in terms of how this is how that really impacts productivity.
Okay.
And the idea of job loss and the idea of layoffs and the idea of these transformations that are going on organizationally are also creating lack of productivity.
Yeah, yeah. So, sort of thinking about this from a leadership perspective is this is a leadership conversation, not an HR conversation that needs to be had.
Right? Because I think a lot of organizations are putting it to HR because it's a people problem, issue,
Mhm.
challenge, however you want to frame that. And because HR really is in the hot seat in terms of, because a lot of it is not just a skilling problem, it's an org design. It's an
Mm,
org design thing. And how are we going to restructure to do all the things? And so um, I think that a lot of leaders have kind of shoved it over to HR to say, "Hey guys," right? Which is really burdening them in terms of their own capacity, but it's really not an HR only conversation. In fact, it's organization wide, and leaders across should be having a team conversation because the uh, secondary and tertiary impacts of these decisions are big. They're big.
yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I was sort of thinking of when you're saying that is that for leaders, then the senior leaders, it's not about them making decisions and then passing it on, even just to the middle managers. We're talking about it's organizationally wide that you have to have these conversations, not just HR, but it is also even bigger than that because as senior leaders make these decisions to whatever, like lay off or go in a different direction or whatever it might be, they just can't say, here, middle managers, go and with empathy, please share the news, right? They need to give them the tools and the rationale and the reason why things are happening so that they can confidently relay the information because that mistrust that you talked about is only going to get wider when if people can't explain the why behind things.
100%. 100%. And you had some really good questions that need to be part of the conversation, which is I'm just going to give these, well,
Yeah.
read them out. Do people believe the process was fair, right? The process of how things were being considered, of how these transitions are happening, or whatever your decision is. Do they understand the trade offs? Okay. Is a great question. The question that should come right before that is, did you make any trade offs? Or are you just
Yeah.
expecting this do more with less
Mhm.
attitude? Do they believe leaders are being honest?
Yeah,
Corporate spin. Are your corporate communications people undermining you by how they frame it?
for
Have you
sure.
Are you really telling it like it is, or are you making it palatable, right? We have a joke about leaders. The job of leaders is to disappoint people at the rate that they can accept it. But in doing that, right, when you make trade off, when you do that, the language of how you talk to it is so important. And if it's hidden behind corporate jargony kind of crap, no one's buying that.
Nope.
Um, do they see leaders carrying responsibility or only asking employees and managers to carry it?
Think that's a big one because there's already a gap between, wages and things like that, right? And so going back to that whole trade-off when they're making decisions, are they making the decisions that are going to affect everybody in a different, like in a fair and equitable way, I guess? And which means that they have to share in it. They should share in it.
Absolutely, they should
And there
share
should
it.
be some transparency around that, right? It's not just
There's
um,
there's huge distrust when a leader, right? So in the tech bros have done this, and um, who's the guy who invented Twitter and then did something else, and then as soon as AI came in, he laid off a bunch of people. I can't remember. Jack Dorsey
Mhm.
running now. Anyway, the guise of this is to enable innovation and whatever, but yet the quarterly earnings thing was like ding, 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 bing, bing, right?
Yes.
So when that happens, the people there are like, I'm calling BS on that.
Yeah.
Right. So this whole thing of what questions are you really answering is going to be important. And are you taking the time to really discuss and discern, or is, well, I was thinking about this as we were kind of doing the prep work. Is the pressure real? Is the pressure real to get rid of all these people?
Mm,
And is it real, or is there a lot of me too? Is there a lot of
yeah.
if they're that we should be
Yeah.
right? And everybody's writing articles about it. And just because it's in the zeitgeist the way it is, are leaders feeling this pressure to do things at a rate that's just really unreasonable?
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because I've had this conversation many times with a couple of friends of mine. It's like, corporate America, corporate Canada, when things are good, we just layer on more people, more layers, more everything. And then like, don't bat an eye when things are tough, just to lay them all off. Right. And then if you have a longer term strategy around people, you wouldn't hire all of those people in the first place, right? Only to let them go. But
And then to rehire them back
right,
because you haven't really thought through,
yeah,
right? And so I was reading a whole thing in one of the HR publications that really was talking about the lack of the HR people think they've got sort of this strategy around how they're going to let people go and how they're going to redevelop people, right? But the employees are they don't see the redeployment, and they don't all they
yeah,
see the, the letting go. And so there's a real disconnect between what's happening strategically inside an organization, how it's all getting communicated, and the thoughts that are how deep are you going in terms of thinking strategically. It costs less to redeploy people than it does to lay off and rehire.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Doing the math.
Yeah. And I think one of the things during the whole COVID time, I think corporations didn't learn from, but did, is many, they furloughed people as opposed to laying them off, right? Because they sort of felt it was going to be the short term thing. And it just, again, that trust when you're doing this ping pong game with people's livelihoods is really tough. So again, it's got to be a corporate wide strategy that makes sense and that people understand.
Well, and it's interesting, and it shows up in really interesting ways, right? You can be internal to an organization,
Mhm.
right? Or you can be a gig worker who is subject to leadership decisions for things that you use, right? And so this
Mhm.
is kind of an interesting parallel. I was listening to a guy who was pissed off at Adobe for uh, raising the monthly subscription rate because they had, and the reasoning, right? We're raising your rates because we've added a bunch of AI functionality to the platform. And he was like, you added a bunch of AI functionality to a platform that nobody asked for, didn't
Mhm.
ask, don't want it. Now you want me as a creative who uses your platform, right, to pay more when you've put services in that put my talents and my jobs and my income at risk.
Right.
And when you look at that in the context of a leadership decision, why would Adobe do that? Right? What, because that would be a whole bunch of creatives going, there are other things I can use, right?
Right. Right. But decisions in vacuums, right? They were looking at price increase, and so you have to have value for the price increase. Not really thinking about was it adding value or not.
Right. But this is the secondary, tertiary impact.
Mhm.
People don't think through what is that, when you think about who are their users, and they're
Yeah.
all creatives.
Exactly. Exactly. Actually.
They're in their Adobe suite. They're not
Mhm.
going, let me just make my own video. That's not happening.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting, interesting. And then again, it's all about those. those conversations and the trade-offs that they're making. And I don't think people are thinking about trade-offs as much as they should.
No, executives don't like trade-offs. Executives don't want to feel a deceleration. They don't want to feel right. But the part they miss is the focus.
Right.
Trade-off is always about the focus. If you're gonna do it well, focus on it. Like,
Mhm.
make it a priority. Like, create. This goes back to the last podcast we did on strategy is not a deck, it's on the calendar. If AI is strategic for you, if putting technology in is strategic for you, and redesigning your work is strategic to you, right? It's going to require trade-off.
Yeah. 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 Okay. So it's a big thing, this whole uncertainty for sure. So
Yeah.
you need to have trade-off conversations. You talked about a little bit, Jen, about the corporate spin, and
Mm,
you have to be really careful that, you're not trying to sell a decision, as, an imperfect decision. You have to not
you're gonna sell it,
over
you want
message it.
it beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, you have to be People don't need the spin. People need the honesty. They need a stronger message that people that speak to them, right? It's always the what's in it for me where people go to.
Mhm.
And I think just in general, organizations need to do I don't know, a better job. They need to be an intentional job of speaking to the people and what's impacting them based
Well,
on the
and
changes that are being made.
to lose the cover your ass, um, approach and really if I'm telling you the truth because I respect you.
Mhm.
I'm telling you how we got here because I respect you. And if you can think in those terms, your turns of phrase might be a little better than, "How's that gonna sound, and let's run it past legal."
Mhm. Yes, exactly. Exactly.
You shouldn't run it past legal, but then you should always walk that line of choose respect over polish, choose
Mhm.
respect over jargon.
Yeah, yeah. And honesty, as we know, will get you far further. And honesty doesn't, 100% equal transparency, because there are things that we're not saying tell them everything. Tell them the things that matter that will help alleviate the stress of the workday, because they already have all these other stresses, right?
Right.
It's like, think about the people that you're employing and have an empathetic communication strategy around the changes.
Right? And remember the message is always with the listener. Like the
Mhm.
person who receives it, it's always there. And you had some great turns of phrase for examples of here's what it sounds like. What does that mean?
Mhm.
Right? Here's what we can do. Here's what we can do right now. And here's what I'm willing to stay in conversation about.
Yeah, and here's what I can't promise,
Yeah.
right? And so, like, you're not over promising and under delivering, but just as I can't promise, like, no employer can promise that the gas prices are going to go down to a normal amount, right?
Mhm.
No employer can guarantee somebody's job, but
Mhm.
as long as they're there from a way that says we're going to continue to support people, support your growth trajectory, support the flexibility and career opportunities in these uncertain times. That's that's what magic people will hear, right? They're in it. They're doing it for me as opposed to they're doing it for them.
And if we're going to send you out, we're going to do our best to send you out as equipped as you can be and with
Mhm.
enough time to do something different. Right?
Yeah.
Because that also matters a huge amount.
Mhm. Yeah. And it's interesting because we were talking before, and I don't know if I probably said this story before, but years ago, listening to a professor in marketing, and what he said, and it always stuck with me, is like when times are tough, people always let go of marketing, right? Slash the marketing budget. And that happens with people leadership and leadership development as well, because they're seen as discretionary budgets, right? Not as important as other things. And that gap gets wider and wider from a marketing perspective, but definitely from a leadership perspective, when you're not when you pull those budgets away and say we're not going to invest in you right now, because when things do turn around, and they will turn around, you need to make sure that those people are there, hit the ground running.
Well, right. And we all know what it looks like when you've got unqualified people in position.
Hmm. Uh-huh.
And pulling the fun pulling your foot off the gas on leadership development. I've watched organizations suffer this,
Hmm.
where they are just ill prepared for these kinds of thoughtful decisions, strategic thinking, problem solving of how do we, how many leaders have already leaped into AI only to spend $1 million to realize I didn't know what it could actually do. I didn't know what I actually wanted. So I spent a bunch of money and nothing happened.
Yep.
Right? That's that's what you set yourself up for when you're not consistently invested in who's going to run the business, who are we setting up to be the learners who can learn and relearn and
Mm.
understand interpersonal and organizational risk and all those kinds of things, because they don't have experience and they're getting younger because that's just what the population looks like.
Sure. So it becomes that whole long-term strategic thinking that we've talked about so many times, as opposed to knee-jerk reaction to something that's happening just today. And there might need to be a balance. You may have to make some short-term decisions, but they can't be done in isolation. They need to be done with a long-term lens. And I
Right.
think it's there. I don't know that those conversations are being had at the same time.
Well, they're being had in closed circles, right? Because these feel like big decisions that they have to be very careful with. And the interesting thing is it's also a huge opportunity for people who are your high potentials, right? To
Mhm.
in those meetings, to sit in those conversations, to watch what happens in the room, right?
Yeah.
Because this is when leadership matters. This is where leaders earn their stripes. When we're all fat and happy and business is fine and we're hiring like nobody's business. Those are easy leadership days, right?
Mhm.
It's when you're in this kind of environment, I think so many leaders are ill-equipped in this, being able to see far enough to have conversations, to slow it down enough to spend the time to think it through, right? As opposed to offloading, deadlining, bring me a rock, not that rock,
Yes. Yeah.
right? And the larger businesses who are really answering to the quarter to quarter play, who aren't really thinking, I'm only here 4 years and I gotta make I'm bonused on this,
Sure.
right? And if I'm under in that organization, the willingness to resist that pressure because of the costly mistakes it's gonna make later.
Right. And the cost to that individual.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I
And
think.
and uncertainty, that moment of pull back, pull up, think through, that's your kung fu.
Mhm.
That's the discipline, because
Yeah.
leadership feels a lot like thinking, not like doing.
Yes. Yeah. Feels like or should it's. I think it is.
Yeah. You had a whole, notion around fairness and sameness.
Mm.
Talk about
Mhm.
that a bit.
Well, fairness, you want things to feel fair across the board. People need to feel it fair, but doesn't mean it's the same. Right? And so, what's fair to me and fair to you may look different. And so it's not and this was more around sort of wage increases and things like that was sort of the kind of the context of it. Like everybody gets 3%, which is great in theory. Um, but there isn't that merit component to it, right? And so if, Jen, you're that high performer and you get the same 3% as me and I'm just dogging it, like, what does that feel like to you?
Oh,
Right.
well,
Yeah.
why am I working so hard? Yeah.
Yeah. And despite what HR might think, people know what people are bonused and all that sort of stuff. People talk, right? There's lots of water coolers and
Everybody shares,
chats and
especially the younger generation, they got
sure.
no clue around what they make. Like,
No, no.
yeah.
Yeah. So we got to be careful that we're not treating everybody the same just because it's easier to do it that way. Again, it goes back to that thinking about the impact of decisions and the trade off. So, what are you willing to trade off by making a sweeping, everybody gets the same decision? What are you willing to trade off, or what are you trading off? And are you having those conversations about the impact to the organization, the best people in the organization?
Well, and from a kung fu standpoint, you are walking, if you're doing this well, you're walking a very interesting line between fair and equitable,
Hmm.
right? Because equitable is while I want to do best for everyone, I do have high performers. I do
Yeah.
have parts of the business I need to invest in. I do have certain specific strategic objectives that I need to support. And so while I would like to do all the funding equally, right, I'm not going to do what I can where I can. And then I'm going to be strategic about really where I need to put the incentive, put the investment, put the thing. And then I need to be able to explain that well.
Yes. So just saying how the decisions were made, how what was considered, you know, what was the risks that we looked at and thought about, right? All these conversations can be had without giving everything away. But I think
Open
it
your kimono, but you do need to provide enough context
yeah.
to make it understandable.
Yeah. So I think that's a really important sort of takeaway because again, sort of it's interesting because one of the conversations I had with an employee was, he basically said, well, the fact that grapes are now $8 for a small little bushel is not going to impact you the same way it's going to impact me, because, different salaries, different stage in life, all of that sort of thing.
Right.
And and so you gotta be mindful of who's who's giving the message and what people are thinking about that person giving the message and where they are,
That's right.
age and stage.
That's right. And if you don't know how your leaders are perceived by your people, I mean, you're going to be tough to find the right person to deliver the message.
Yeah, yeah. I think one of the other things that we'd like to talk a lot about is that accountability. And when things are tough and people are stressed, is it a license to pull back on accountability, right? Because if there's too much stress in my world, I surely to God you can't have a conversation to me about doing more with my job. Um, and the answer is no, right? You still have to have what is being called, I think, compassionate accountability.
Right. And I want to just change the phrasing because you know how I am about accountability.
Mm,
Is when we talk about accountability, what people are really talking about are performance results.
yeah,
So it's do performance results still matter and have you expanded those results because you're asking people to do more with less, right? And
mhm,
where have we really communicated that? Where have we created space for agreement, right?
yeah,
When we hold people accountable, we're looking for ownership and people will only own, right? What
hmm
they're clear about. And if you're trying to give them things they're not clear about, and a lot of the things that are just left to, well, who's going to decide this? Well, who's going to own that, right? Hasn't really been made clear. So of course they're not going to own it. Of
hmm
course they're not.
right.
Don't scratch your head if you haven't been clear about how this transformation is going to happen for somebody.
Mm-hmm. And so I think so. Just basically on what you said, it's this notion of you can hold two thoughts at once, right? Yes, the economy is shit right now, and everybody's struggling, but we still need to get our job done. And how do we create space for you to um, have that clarity on what your job is, and so you show up doing a great job every day, but also having the empathy for and the compassion for what's going on around them. And it's not by not having those conversations, it's about having more conversations. I think really all of this is about having heightened communication and heightened. I've heard of organizations that in the last little while are starting to have internal little mini town halls really frequently so that people can ask more questions and that they're able to tell them as much as they can, and creating that level of um, sort of empowerment for people to ask questions and get good answers, but also continue to do their job and still be held accountable, but still be able to have that feelings that and sharing the feelings that things aren't going so well externally.
And part of the overwhelm and the capacity issues are leaders are not embracing. When we talk about capacity, I don't think a lot of leaders have a good understanding of how to look at a person's capacity.
Mm,
I there's an underlying or tendency when people say I'm overwhelmed and overburdened for people to go, "Oh, quit whining," right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Capacity, right? And so there's a question about, individual productivity or whatever it is. But what leaders always fail to really consider when you think about capacity is the cognitive load, right?
Mm.
And the thought load and let alone the emotional um energy that goes into when you're in an unknown and I don't know and what what's happening and why did this team get let go and I like
Yeah.
the energy it takes to process, think through, wonder, worry, strategize is a lot. And some leaders are also having this thought load problem, right?
Sure.
So you're looking at um, how we're having consideration capacity. If this is where, if you don't know how to measure capacity, if you don't know how to look at capacity, if you're not having discussions about capacity, how
Mm.
you're indirectly overwhelming and underestimating.
Yes. Yeah. And I just want to stop there for a second because I think that's a really important thing that you've just raised. Like, how do you measure capacity? Right? Because there's the there's the actual capacity. We have 8 hours a day to get a job done. But as you're talking about, like, your capacity diminishes when your cognitive load is higher, right?
Right.
You just cannot do as much. And
Right.
and so is it when they're looking at capacity, and this is maybe just a question, maybe you've uncovered the answer to it, Jen. But is it that are we measuring the 8 hours and what they're doing in the 8 hours? Or are we sort of looking at it holistically to see why they can't get their job done and sort of creating maybe those mental breaks that allow them to re-energize a little bit more? Like, I don't know. I don't know if that
Well, I
was really a
mean,
question, but
and part of when we talk about you need to consider what's happening outside the work environment, because the thought load is also burdened by I can't afford to
yes, very
buy,
much so.
right? So it's those things creep in because you are a whole person. You're a whole person on the job. And
Mhm.
so as you get the context from your family or whatever that goes on in your day, that also creates that sort of thing. And I don't think companies have spent time as they go through the transitions, right? Because two things in play. We're not looking at capacity and understanding what capacity demands we're asking for and what capacity we are already at. And leaders are not looking at it in terms of if you are not considering this, that's a failure on leadership's part because asking people to do more is you fluffing off decisions around priorities.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so I want to be really clear, right? So when leaders get frustrated in a session with me and they're frank about, oh, I think they're just all whiners or and I'm like, what part of this do you own because you haven't accepted a trade-off, refused to make trade-offs, or you won't focus your people, which means doing less that's more strategic or doing the most strategic things and putting the rest aside for a period of time.
Right.
And that's a big lesson in leaders who can say, my job is to create the focus and the trade-offs to make sure the capacity is where I want it and have that conversation. And so capacity is looking at our processes and understanding, have you really broken it down into how many hours a day do you spend doing your things?
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
And when we give people more things to say, what do you think it will take you to do that? What kind of, and really looking through that. And that's a dynamic conversation. That's not
Mm.
because I might say, well, that's probably 20 hours a week for me. And then I get into it and I'm like, oh, no, this is an uphill slog. Right.
Yes, yeah. And creating that space for somebody to say, "No, I don't have the capacity, and this is why. But if you want me to do it, then I can't do this over here."
And I can't be in your 25 meetings every week.
No, gosh, no, we can't go down that meeting chain again. Ugh. Yes, but yeah, you're right. And so it's really looking at it holistically, understanding that there are there's external pressures more so now in this right now, that is impacting so many.
Mhm.
And then the internal pressures that the outside pressures are putting on our organizations, right, to do more with less and to cut costs and things like that.
Yeah,
And our people are the ones that are suffering.
exactly. Exactly. And the lack of clarity, right? The lack of clear understanding, right? And if I'm not clear, I can't communicate clearly.
Yeah.
Sure. Right? I'm telling a story and I'm just kind of working my way through it as opposed to going, where am I really clear on where this is headed? And I think one of the biggest issues that is bottlenecking and exacerbating all this uncertainty is it's the leader's job to create clarity. It's the leader's job to do this sense making. And that doesn't mean I want you to be a fortune teller and see the future. That means if we're going to invest in this thing, we're going to reorg this thing, or we're going to transform this thing into what? What is the end state?
Yeah.
Where are we going? Can you describe to me what that looks like based on where you are? I don't
Hmm.
be 100% correct. But when I can understand, oh, they're very clear on where we're heading and what right will look like when we get there, my ability to grok your decision making gets so much better.
Yeah. Yeah.
But when you can't say, when it's just, we're going to streamline, that language is meaningless.
Yes. Yes. That's just corporate spin.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we've got a few takeaways on this one, Jen, right? I think leaders need to acknowledge and name the reality without minimizing it. The reality that people are going through all of this other stuff and that the pressure is real. We need our leaders within our organizations to acknowledge it, and that will help build trust, and maybe a little bit more optimism within the workforce.
Yeah. More strategy on um it's your workforce planning, but that's not just AR. That
Yeah,
is redesign, redevelopment, and really do the math. Do the math on layoffs versus who are, what are we really doing? Because are we going to end up rehiring at higher costs?
exactly, exactly. I think the other sort of takeaway is that leaders and leadership in general, without throughout the organization, they need to really be clear on decisions and explain the decisions clearly, especially when they're a negative, right, decision. It's impacting one of me as an employee or the next group over because what happens to me next, right? And so when times are tough, we have to over communicate, and not with the spin that you talked about, but with really good. We decided
Right.
to do this
You're
because
confident in your decisions. You're clear about your decisions.
yeah,
That should definitely come across in your communication.
yes, yeah,
The clarity of should answer the questions for people.
mm-hmm. We have to make fairness visible, right? It's not just fairness isn't just a value; it's a leadership practice that needs to be visible to everyone. And again, going back to fair isn't the same.
And fairness, don't get caught up in the idea of fair. Get caught up in the idea that what people experience as fair is how you show your work.
Yeah,
How you show your work. So if you're making tough decisions, show your work.
yeah, that's great. Four, I think, might be practice compassionate accountability, right? Don't let accountability go because we know it's really important, but it's not about saying, just stop your complaining and do more with less, but we want to make sure that we're holding people still accountable but we're compassionate about it.
Well, and realistic,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
So if you're gonna have accountability, you've got to have realistic understanding. And so that led us into start talking about capacity. Start looking at what that really means because that's only going to bolster what you can really hold people accountable for. And so compassionate accountability is adjacent to capacity measuring and understanding and discussions, which is adjacent to stronger, clearer decision making conversations.
Yeah, yeah. And I think my fifth takeaway, and Jen, you probably have others, is give people a future. Make sure that we are upskilling during these times when we don't take away your development. Let's make sure that we're upskilling. We're giving people the tools. We're making them AI ready. We're not making them fearful that AI is going to take their job. Having those honest conversations about how work is changing and how they fit into that work matrix going forward.
Yes, and it's okay to say, here's what right's going to look like based on what we know.
Yeah,
But we
absolutely.
want to adapt. And so put yourself, leaders do not show up as knowers, show up as learners.
Mhm.
Here's what we're learning. Here's why we're making the decisions we're making. We're learning along as all companies are. Be okay about that because you're going to have to adapt. All of your decisions may not be spot on. You may realize if you're doing good decision making, what are we looking for that are red flags if this isn't going to go in the right direction, right? What are the
Yeah.
leading indicators that the decision is working?
Mm-hmm.
There's,
Mm-hmm.
we got to pivot because we made a decision here and here's what we're seeing, right?
Yeah.
And when you keep people in the conversation with you, in the learning with you, in the understanding as you make sense of it, the easier it is for them to trust what you're doing.
Yeah. Right. And this is about building trust. All of this is when you have a trusting organization, things that you do trust can take a long time to build and little time to erode. And so really think about those decisions.
And if you're going to build trust, bring them in at the level of the work, right?
Yeah.
That they should be in the conversation of the learning in ways that make sense. So that they have a voice in solution building. They have a voice in, I can see why this job is no longer relevant. They have a voice in, right? Versus this is happening to me. It should be happening with me.
Exactly. Exactly. Great. Any other takeaways, Jen?
No, that's a lot. That's a lot
Yeah.
for one podcast.
Yeah.
Here.
And it all started with the gas prices.
Awesome. This is the price of tomatoes.
Yes, those darn tomatoes. But so I think, there's a lot for leaders to think about. I think this would be a good podcast for you to share with other leaders in your organization, things to think about, things to talk about around your leadership table that maybe you're not talking about now. Like, are you having those right conversations? And are you over communicating? Are you thinking about fairness in the right way? Are you being transparent? Are you empathetic? Are you being compassionate around your accountability? There's so many pieces today, all to say, mental health and the stress that people are under today is at an all-time high.
And leaders aren't exempt from that, right?
So no, that for sure.
And what I would tell you is if this all feels overwhelming, like, holy crap, how am I doing all that? Is you have to slow down. You have to create the space. And in doing the things we're asking you to do, you feel better. You feel stronger. You feel less overwhelmed. You feel less uncertain. So it's not just do this for everybody. Doing this is for you as well. And beware of the pressures that undo this for you, right?
Yeah.
Beware of the need for speed. Beware of the quarter to quarter. Beware of the Me Too tendencies that are definitely happening.
Yes. All right. Well, I think that's a lot for today, as you say. So we love your comments. So please give us comments on our podcast. If there's anything that you'd like to hear Jen and I talk about, give us some ideas. We're happy to talk about anything, really, honestly. And if you haven't already hit the subscribe button, make sure that you're hitting it and getting our monthly podcast to your inbox.
Great. All right, then. We will see you on the next one.
All right. Thanks, Jen.
Thanks, Sandy.
Thank you so much for listening. You can check out Sandy's website at satoriconsultinginc.ca. That's SATORI Consulting INC.ca. And you can check out Jen's website at accountabilityatwork.com. If you like what you hear, let us know by leaving a review on your favorite listening platform. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.